USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at usaa.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40, created and hosted by me, writer and broadcaster Sam Baker. My guest today is the best-selling novelist Jeanine Cummins. Now, you might think you haven't heard of her, but I'll be pretty surprised if you haven't heard of the book that catapulted her into the public eye in all sorts of ways, American Dirt. It's a story about a Mexican mother and son escaping to America after their entire family is massacred by a drug cartel. Oprah said, "It humanized the migration process in a way nothing else I'd ever felt or seen had." Jeanine was in her mid-40s with 2 novels and a memoir under her belt when American Dirt caught light. After a massive bidding war, the book was sold for millions of dollars in 38 countries. But when it was published, Jeanine found herself at the heart of a furore that questioned her right to have written it at all. Despite topping the bestseller list on both sides of the Atlantic and selling almost 4 million copies, for a long time she questioned whether she'd be able to write another word. Now she has. Speak to Me of Home is the story of 3 generations of women who are, like Jeanine, of Puerto Rican descent. It's an engrossing cross-generational family saga and a heartfelt look at identity and what it means to belong.
I saw these women surrounding me with light and what they were able to demonstrate for my children, for my girls, the strength of female friendship and how we can survive hard things if we support each other. What a gift. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Jeanine joined me from her home on the East Coast to talk candidly about living through that storm. The meaning of home, developing empathy for our grandmothers, the life-changing power of female friends, turning 50, and finally learning the holiness of no. Tell me a little bit about, because it is so relevant to the new book, tell me a little bit about growing up. What was your childhood like?
I had a great childhood. It was very, I'd say it was idyllic in ways that I did not recognize until I was older. But I had a very happy little nuclear family. My dad was in the Navy and my mom was a nurse. And I had 2 siblings, an older brother and a younger sister. We moved around a lot when we were little. I was born in Spain. When we first moved to the United States, we lived in California for a while. We had a brief stopover in St. Louis. Then eventually we landed on the East Coast, which is where I mostly grew up outside of Washington, D.C. But what I didn't understand at the time, in the 80s, where I lived, is a town called Gaithersburg, Maryland. It is regularly recognized as the most diverse small city in America. But what is really astonishing about it is not necessarily the diversity, but how integrated that diversity is. My childhood friends were never mostly white. I was never in a room with all white people until I went to college, ever. I didn't realize what a gift that was when I was growing up. I thought it was normal. And then I went off to college and was really astonished by how much segregation existed in the world and how I felt for the first time in my life like I had to choose which room to be in. And I was not comfortable in either room, But I mean, it was a great gift. And I look back at my childhood and I still am close with a lot of my childhood friends and a lot of the people I went to high school with, and many of whom married outside of their race and had mixed race families. And it was sort of this, it almost felt like a post-racial experience. And then we all went out in the world and we're like, oh, that's not real life, you know?
What was it about that town, do you think?
Well, I think the fact that it is a commuter town to Washington, D.C., where there are a ton of international and government jobs. There were many, many people living in our area who were, you know, we were 20 minutes or 30 minutes from Embassy Row, you know? So just, it was also linguistically diverse and just, I don't know, but it remains that way to an extent. I mean, all of Montgomery County, where I grew up, is astonishingly integrated. I go back there, I go out to dinner with my friends, and not just in a restaurant, but table by table, there it's integrated. You see Black people dining with white people and Latinos dining with Asians, and you don't see that even so much in New York. It's like, I mean, sometimes, right? But people tend to stay in their little pockets. Something about Montgomery County, I don't know, but tremendously integrated and in the most amazing way. Like really just, it was a gift of my childhood that we definitely took for granted until we were adults.
So as a kid, were you, did you think, because since, certainly in the last decade, 5 years or so, you've had to think a lot about your background and who you are and your identity. Did you think about that as a kid? Was it a thing when you were growing up?
No, I didn't think about it at all, but I began thinking about it a lot in college. And I have been thinking about it a lot ever since college, because I went to school I went to a state college, Towson University, only about an hour away from where I grew up. It's in the outskirts of Baltimore. And it was a markedly different experience. There's a scene in the new book, Speak to Me of Home, where one of the characters, Ruth, goes off to college, finds herself sort of having to choose which room to eat lunch in because it's entirely segregated. And that scene was very much from my real life. I went to this college expecting that my circle of friends or my social development there would mirror in some ways what I had grown up with. And instead, I found myself in a position where for the first time in my life, not only did I have to define who I was or how I saw myself, but I had to really make an effort to have a diverse group of friends. There were some people at that college who I felt had successfully crossed over completely. So I knew a couple of white people who had only Black friends and a couple of Black people who had only white friends. But I did not know anyone who had a mixture of friends from different backgrounds. And so I did this really nerdy thing, and I started a club with my Black boyfriend in college called Target Unity, where we were trying to get diverse groups of people together. And he was also from Montgomery County, and we were both so out of our depth. It was such a strange, we were like, what is going on here? I happened to have a small scholarship for Puerto Rican students as part of the way that I paid for my college. I was so proud of that because I was not a great student, but I remember a few experiences where it came up and people were like, what do you mean? Why do you have that? And I was like, well, I'm Puerto Rican. And they were like, are you? And I was like, I think so. So that was the first time in my life where I had to start really trying to understand the way I perceive myself and the way others perceive me, and then the gulf between those two things. And a lot of that work is evident in the new book. A lot of the anecdotes, a lot of the little moments that happen in the book were drawn from my real life experiences.
And your background is your grandmother was Puerto Rican, wasn't she?
Right. Yes.
So you're quarter Puerto Rican.
Yeah. It's funny, when I was growing up, my brother and sister and I all used to say, we're half Irish and half Puerto Rican. That was our refrain. And it wasn't true, actually. We're only a quarter Puerto Rican. But we adopted my father's ethnicity completely and discarded my poor mother's ethnicity. It was like, didn't count. It wasn't even part of the story. And part of what I have tried to unpack over the last 5 years since American Dirt was published. And I had to really contend with these questions in a very public and often painful way. Was what was it in my psychology that caused that? And my brothers and sisters' psychology. Many of our cousins don't identify as Puerto Rican at all. Many of them do, but we all have a different experience. We all have a different relationship with Puerto Rico. My father was the oldest of 8 kids, and he did spend much of his childhood back and forth to Puerto Rico, between Puerto Rico and St. Louis. He attended a couple of grades of elementary school there. He was an altar boy at a church in San Juan. You know, some of his younger siblings really didn't have any relationship with the island. I think also the fact that we were born in Spain, my sister and I were both born in Spain, and we spoke Spanish early. That was our first language. I think that made us feel more connected as well to our Puerto Rican heritage. But it wasn't until I was in my 30s that a mixed race friend of mine said to me, well, you know, it's very common for mixed ethnicity people to adopt the identity of whoever is the real nurturer in their family, which is typically the mother. But in my family, it was my dad. And so we just sort of automatically felt like his identity was our identity, I think. So yeah, I've had to like readjust how I talk about that in the wake of American Dirt, when I had to sort of examine whether there was anything fraudulent in the way that I was experiencing my identity, which, like, spoiler alert, there is not.
So where was your career before American Dirt caught light, for want of a better way of putting it?
Yeah, I will call it very lower mid-list.
I know that feeling.
I had 3 books. So American Dirt was my 4th book. My first book was a memoir. It was my most successful book until American Dirt. It was a memoir of a true crime that happened to my family when I was 16 years old. It was the story of a double homicide that happened in my family and how we endured that experience, and then our ensuing experiences in the criminal justice system in the United States, and what it feels like to live through the aftermath of a violent murder of some loved ones. And that book was very painful, and it was hard to be on tour and talk about that book. And when it was finished, I was determined to get as far away from my real life as possible. So I was like, I'm going to write about a traveler in Ireland in the 1950s. And that's what I did. And then, so I wrote 2 novels after that, and they were very quiet. I was happy to have them published. I was happy to be sort of not even really scraping out a living as a writer. I was also teaching workshops. I was hustling. My husband, thank God, has a good income and a stable career. So I was able to grind it out for a lot of years, but I never, ever anticipated the kind of success that American Dirt would bring. Never.
I mean, when did you first become aware that American Dirt wasn't going to go the same route as the previous 2?
I think my first hint was I sent it to my agent. He wrote back, wow, 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 which he had never.
Yeah, that's not an agent thing, is it?
And then we had a lot of conversation about strategy, about how we were going to go about finding the right publisher for it. And then his strategy was to send it out to like 26 editors on a Friday afternoon. And I think we got our first yes on Saturday. And then we had like 22 yeses by Tuesday.
Gosh. And for anyone listening, that does not happen. It just doesn't happen.
Yes.
Very rare.
It was astonishing. And so we didn't have 22 editors at the auction because a lot of people were like, oh, I can't afford this book. So they bowed out of the race before it went to auction. But we had a 3-day auction in the publishing world in New York. I worked in publishing for 10 years. I never saw anything like it. It was crazy. And then from there, of course, it just continued. But those first moments, I was immediately aware that this was different, but I was not aware when I was writing it at all. It's one thing that I think about so frequently, because people sometimes said to me, well, you must have known. And I was like, why would I? I started writing this book in 2013 when no one was paying attention to immigration. There is a humanitarian crisis at the border. No one cares. No one cares still. So yeah, I spent 5 years researching and writing a novel. All the while, no one cared about this subject. They had also never cared about any of my previous books. So I was like, why would they care about this one? I thought it would be published in much the same way that my previous books were published, which is to say that my mom and dad would be very proud of me. And, and that would be it. So yeah, the reality of what happened in the publishing world surrounding that book and me was incredibly surprising in all the ways, all the best ways and all the worst ways.
I mean, you did literally experience every author's biggest fantasy and every author's biggest nightmare within a year?
Yes. I think even probably within 8 months, it was short. I was like the golden child of publishing and then the pariah. Like on a dime, it turned on a dime.
I mean, why do you think the backlash when it came was so great? I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because it was very online. And for people who don't live very online, they might not understand how, being hammered online can be.
Yeah, it was brutal. But I should say, too, that the thing that made it different from any other literary pile-on that had happened before was that it was legitimized by the mainstream press. It wasn't only online. It was also in the New York Times and the LA Times. And, it was very, very intense. And I mean, the answer, why was it so intense? There are so many reasons why I think it happened. I mean, one of them was that I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then another reason is that people entirely misunderstood and mischaracterized who I am. So there were things being written about me online where I would read them and I would say to my husband, like, this girl sounds terrible. Like, if any of this was true, I understand why people hate me, because it's awful. But so much of it was not true.
What kind of thing?
I mean, there was an awful lot written about my ethnicity, which, like, really, no writer should ever have to defend their identity in a public forum. My ethnicity was adjudicated on Twitter and I lost. I was a fake Puerto Rican. I am a fake Latina falsa. I think for me, that was the most painful part. There was this suggestion that I had never identified Latina until it suited me to exploit my distant heritage because I was writing my Latino novel. The people who were asserting that falsehood know nothing about me. There were a couple of things that were taken out of context, a half sentence. For example, in 2015, I wrote an essay in the New York Times about racial justice and about what happened to my family when I was 16. And in that context, it felt very important to acknowledge my whiteness. And so in that essay, I wrote, I am white, which is not untrue. I am white. But there is no part of that statement that precludes me from being Puerto Rican. I didn't think I had to say in 2020, Latino people come in different colors. It was stunning to me that was used as evidence to suggest that I had never identified as Latino, when I've been identifying that way my whole life. And in fact, that essay was the first time I had ever publicly acknowledged my whiteness, which is not like a surprise to anyone. I walk around in the world as a white person. But two things can be true And it was so painful to me, this idea that I was not, that someone else was able to determine my identity for me, or that I was being duplicitous about it, that it wasn't really who I am. That was very painful.
How did the backlash affect your confidence in terms of your work, as well as, of course, your identity?
Well, I think initially I had a very difficult time trusting my voice. I had a very difficult time in the first year determining whether I ever wanted to use my voice again. It would have been easier to just roll over and die in many ways. But once I started to work through everything, I think it gave me a greater confidence eventually. It took me a long time to get there. But I think the things I learned, the perspective that I gained from being in the eye of such a public storm, from being the target of that much hostility, what I learned from being in that position and witnessing and observing was really beneficial to me in the long term. It gave me a greater sense of how the world works. I don't know. I mean, the things that I learned are tremendously personal. What I will say is that among the things I learned was that my determination to express my own identity does not belong to anyone but me. And that is a millennial birthright,
It sure is.
But I am Generation X.
Yeah, so you don't have it.
I don't have the language. Well, I do now, but I didn't. I didn't in 2020. So when people asserted my identity for me, I was at a loss frequently in those conversations where there were times when people corrected me. I remember one conversation, and I don't remember what I had said, but the person that was interviewing me said, "Well, you're a white-facing Latina." And I was like, okay. I don't even know what that means. Well, I do now. But at the time, I was like, why are you telling me who I am? We just met, It was so bizarre. But I learned how to take ownership of my words and my identity. I also developed a much thicker skin. I learned to not care very much when people misunderstand me, and when people willfully misunderstand me. That has nothing to do with me. That is a you problem, not a you problem, but the person, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I also think look, I've had a lot of trauma in my life. The experience of being in that aftermath of publishing American Dirt was a trauma. It just was. But I think the gift that it gave me was at my age I have spent enough years of my life feeling sad. I have had a lot to contend with. I have spent a lot of years of my life grieving. And so one great gift of this experience when I emerged from the dark part of it was that I have learned how to spend every single day reaching for joy, every day. And it's not always available to me, but usually it is. On the days when it's available, I am going to feel happy. I don't want to be sad anymore. I have earned some joy. So that's a gift.
This episode of The Shift is sponsored by Shopify. Is it just me, or does it seem like everyone is either starting a side hustle or becoming their own boss? And you know what they're hearing a lot? It's the sound of another sale on Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your own business. Shopify is the commerce platform revolutionizing millions of businesses, big and small, worldwide. Whether you're selling jeans or juice, books or blusher, Shopify simplifies selling online and in person. Covers all your sales channels from a shop-front-ready POS system to its all-in-one e-commerce platform. It even helps you sell across social media like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And it's full of industry-leading tools that give you complete control without having to learn new skills like design or coding. And thanks to award-winning help and with an extensive business course library, Shopify is ready to support your success every step of the way. What's lovely about Shopify is that no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify will be there to empower you with confidence and control to take your business to the next level. It's time to get serious about selling and get Shopify today. This is Possibility, powered by Shopify. Sign up for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/shift, all lowercase. Go to shopify.co.uk/shift to take your business to the next level today. That's shopify.co.uk/shift. I'm not going to silver lining you, but it did occur to me several times when I was reading Speak to Me of Home, which, I've said to you before, but I really enjoyed. And, my mum is top of the wait list for it. But it really made me feel like I don't think, and I don't want to be telling you what you think, but I didn't think that this book could have happened if you hadn't been forced into a questioning everything about yourself position. Is that fair?
I do think that's fair. Yes. I mean, I don't know. Could have happened. I don't know, but I don't think it would have happened. As I said earlier, I have been engaged in these questions about my identity from the time I was about 18 or 19 years old. I never had any desire to engage in them publicly. I wasn't necessarily engaging with them very deeply. I was engaging with them when they came up in my life. I wondered why it was that this is a conversation that I have had many times with other people who are from mixed backgrounds, where it always seems like certain people recognize me. They're like, I knew you were something. I knew, and it's like, what are you? I knew there's something in there. And then other people are like totally oblivious to it. They're like, no, you're definitely totally a white lady. Those kinds of questions, whenever they came up, I always found them really fascinating. And I wondered where that comes from. In fact, I find all of this fascinating. And I think frequently about what I'm doing to my poor children who are... they are growing up with more Puerto Rican influences than I had growing up. They can sing every word on the new Bad Bunny album. They eat, I cook Puerto Rican food. We listen to Latino pop music almost exclusively, much to my husband's dismay. And they have a lot of Puerto Rican cultural touchstones in their childhood. And yet they are mostly Irish. My husband is from Ireland. I am almost half Irish. I mean, look, we're American. My kids are American first and foremost, but my kids are very white. And we've had this ongoing conversation from the time they were tiny. And I had to fill out the paperwork at the doctor where it says, first it asks you about your race, and then it asks you about your ethnicity. And I have always checked the box that says white and the box that says Latina, always. Because the other box says not Latino. And I'm never going to check that box. So, but with my kids, I'm like, are you, where do you fall? So when they were little, I checked the box that said Latino, even though they are an eighth Puerto Rican. Because I don't like the notion that they are not. I don't ever want to say that they are not. It is part of who they are. But now that they are old enough, they are teenagers, they are like, Mommy, we are not. I am okay being not.
So they're the opposite of the character Daisy and Carlitos in the book.
Yes. You know what? They're very proud of their connection to Puerto Rico. But the way they articulate it is always to say, well, my mom is Puerto Rican. My mom is part Puerto Rican. They don't say that they are, which is fine. It's just here we go with another new generation and how they're going to navigate. But it's funny because I think that my brother and sister and I all endeavored to simplify identity for our kids in different ways and totally failed. Like it definitely backfired. My sister's last name is Lopez, and she gave her boys Irish names. So they are Eamon and Oisin Lopez, which I think is amazing and awesome. But yeah, these kids are not going to be less confused than we were about identity.
That is in no way simplifying. Tell us about the family history that inspired Speak to Me of Home, because it has 3 amazing female characters cross generations. You mentioned Ruth earlier, who's like the middle character, Daisy, who's the granddaughter. But Rafaela was inspired by your grandmother, wasn't she?
Yes. Rafaela's a very different woman than my grandmother Maria was. Rafaela's nicer. I think she's a little bit more optimistic, but the circumstances of Rafaela's life are exactly the circumstances of Maria's life. My grandmother was born into a lot of wealth in Puerto Rico, was raised in a very sort of, as a socialite, sort of in a family that came from elite circles and traveled in elite circles. She had a stellar education. They had live-in servants. It was like next level. And when she was 16, her dad lost everything. And no one really knows what happened. They fell out of their life. Like they went from being extremely wealthy to being, scraping by overnight. She was sent to Trinidad to work on a naval base at 16 years old. And that's where she met my grandfather. So this is all the sort of setup of the book, is that this is what happens to Rafaela in the book. And I think the reason that I always was interested in my grandmother. She had an amazing life. She had 8 children. My dad was the oldest. And she had a really hard time being a grown-up in St. Louis, being a Puerto Rican woman in St. Louis in the 1950s, where people were really terrible to her. My grandfather was frequently away. He was a traveling salesman when he was finished in the Navy. So he would be gone on a submarine for 6 months, and she would be at home alone in a white community with a bunch of mixed ethnicity kids. And it was not a good situation for her, and she suffered. And I think she spent most of her life feeling bitter and angry and sort of affronted, like, don't you know who I am? And people just treated her like a Puerto Rican. I didn't think about any of this in a zoomed out way until I had my own kids, but I was aware that she was a very difficult woman and that my father and his siblings did not have a good childhood. And it wasn't until I was a young mom who was struggling to keep my own act together that I started thinking about her in terms of giving her grace. I was like, well, of course she was mad. Of course she was unhappy. And how hard would it be to be a good and soft and nurturing mother, given the parameters of how she had to live her life? And so I think she was my entry into the book as much as my own recent experiences and wanting to sort of unpack my own identity. And of course, the middle generation character is the missing link, right? What is it that my father inherited from his mother? And how did he change it before he passed it along to us so that we felt the ways that we felt, which were very different from the ways that he felt, which were very different from the ways that she felt? I wanted to dig into all of that and find some answers. And I really liked the notion that I could give Maria almost like a do-over. Like, what if she had the opportunity to make some different choices? What if there had been money, What if she had had the chance to what if there had been contraception? How would her life have been different? Might she have been happier? Might she have been a more patient, loving mother? And so Rafaela was my opportunity to answer those what ifs.
Because there's some scenes, aren't they, in the book that you're like, well, wow, that's horrific. I mean, not in a gross way, but in a treating another human being like that kind of way. And those things actually happened to Maria.
Yeah. So I think maybe one of the examples that you're thinking of is there's an incident where the husband, Peter, goes to join a country club and he's all excited and he comes home and he's like, we've joined this country club and I can't wait to show you guys. And he brings the family the next day. And as soon as they lay eyes on Rafaela, they're like, she's not really supposed to be here. This is a whites only club. That was a real thing that happened. And the compromise was that they would not give my grandmother a locker in the ladies' locker room. They gave her a locker in the staff room at the country club instead. You know, when I first heard that story, I was so incensed by it. I was so disgusted by it. It gave me so much empathy for my grandmother, who I'd never had a ton of empathy for previously. I also, you know, I had an unreasonable response. Like, why did they put up with it? Which is totally unfair because there was no choice but to put up with it. It was 1950 something when this happened. So it's easy as someone, you know, who grew up in the 80s and 90s to say like, they should have fought. They should have been like, this is an outrage. What was she supposed to do? There was no place where she was welcomed. There was no place that she belonged.
I think a lot about our grandmothers and the lives of our grandmothers and what they, you know, what was expected of them, you know, what they had to do. And we're always, and it feels like increasingly now because of, you know, the climate, being told that our grandmothers were happy and what's our problem? And I often think, but were they?
I can tell you, no, they were not. I had one grandmother who was happy. I think about this a lot too, because I know myself and I know that I would have been miserable if I was Maria. And probably I would have had it in me to be mean to my kids. And like, I don't know, I hope not, but like realistically, I would not have done well in that situation. I would have been bitter and angry my whole life, I think. And she was.
And it's like you say, you know, there was not contraception. And then when there wasn't if you were Catholic. You know, yes, there were a lot more children, but that wasn't. And so, of course, some or even a lot of those women will have wanted those children. But also there will be a lot of women who just had children because that's what you did.
Right. Yes. And imagine, I think that was the position that Maria found herself in. And in addition to that, she had no support. You know, she didn't have any family at all where she was raising these kids, which is why she so frequently went back to Puerto Rico for a year at a time or 2 years, because she couldn't handle it being adrift in the world. There was no place where they belonged in St. Louis. There was no community for a mixed race family in St. Louis at that time. There was no cultural foundation for her there. It was like an entirely foreign landscape. She couldn't even buy the foods she was familiar with, you know, and she had been raised with servants. So she didn't even have a background in like how to do the laundry. You know, my kids have been doing their own laundry since they were 9. Like Maria was not.
Nice work.
Yeah. It means I don't have to do it. So I love that the character Rafaela is resilient in these ways. Like she tries, she gets in there. She's like, I'm going to do my best. And then she fails a lot. And then she's like, I'm doing my best. She doesn't take it when people are not nice about it. But she also has the benefit, in addition to being a fictional character, of being 25 years further along than Maria was. You know, St. Louis in the 1980s was a very different place than St. Louis in the 1950s. So I think that was probably, I don't think I could have written the book accurately or authentically if I had moved everything back 30 years, because I don't have the bandwidth to fully understand the experience of what it would have been like just the racial dynamics alone. I cannot imagine it. And you have to be able to fully imagine it to write it well.
You would have been back into another 5 years research, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
In the acknowledgements of the book, you wrote two things that really leapt out of me. One was, it took me a long time to learn the word hometown. Did writing the book help you?
Yes, I think it did. And another thing that has really helped me is just spending more time back in Gaithersburg, which I can now say is my hometown, even though I wasn't born there. And I lived a lot of other places before I lived in Gaithersburg. And I've lived a lot of places since I left there. That is the place where I grew up. It was the most formative community of my life. But the reason I can identify it now so clearly as my hometown is that when I go back there, the support that I have, like this unconditional, just enormous pride that people have in me. Everybody I went to high school with, they come to all of my events. They, when it felt like the whole world was against me, there was never any question that Gaithersburg was for me. I always felt like hometown girl made good when I went back there. And, it's where all the majority of my childhood memories are. So I get really emotional now talking about it because I'm like, why didn't I see this before? It seems so obvious. But I am really proud to be from Gaithersburg and, a product of the Montgomery County public school system. And it was a great place to grow up. I'm proud of it.
I think that we don't see it because at different points in our life, we're looking for different things.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I also just think for a long time, and this is the quest that began when I was in college, for a long time, when anyone ever asked me, where are you from? I was like, how much time do you have? It's a long answer. And I still sometimes struggle. It depends on where I am in the world. If I'm in Ireland and somebody says, where are you from? I say, New York. I am not from New York. I'm not a New Yorker. If I'm in the Caribbean and someone says, where are you from? I say, I'm Puerto Rican. Because I think what they mean is something different. I think they mean where is your Caribbean root? Where are your Caribbean roots? And sometimes maybe I'm misunderstanding the question. But I have never answered I'm from Gaithersburg, Maryland. It's just it's never come out of my mouth. But that is actually where I'm from.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
Another thing that you wrote in the acknowledgements, you've got to be careful with acknowledgements, People like me go through them with a fine-tooth comb. You wrote, there are many people I won't name here, but without whom I would not have survived the last 5 years. I'm not going to ask you who they are, but what has the last 5 years taught you about friendship?
Well, I will say that there were a whole bunch of heroic women and men, but mostly women, who have lived through their own battles of this kind, who swooped into my life in the most heroic way and taught me how to be okay. I will never forget what those people did for me. And they know who they are. And I get super emotional talking about it because I really don't know how I would have survived it. There was a time when I remember saying to one friend, this is the stuff that suicides are made of. I was never that way inclined, thank God. But that's how bad it felt. It was the presence of those incredibly strong women in my life and seeing how they had survived their own challenges and risen above that gave me the hope that one day I would feel okay. I would not just be okay, but feel happy again. And I don't mean to sound, I hope none of this comes across as super maudlin, because I look back at it now and I'm like, yes, it was a trauma. It was painful. It was terrible, but it was a moment in time, and I have a great life and I have perspective on it now. It doesn't feel any longer as dire as it felt when I was in the middle of it. I'm not embarrassed by the characterization of it as a trauma, but I'm careful, not to overstate it. But I will say this, there were a tremendous number of people who really disappointed me during that time, not personally, but like what was going on in the world and what I observed as cowardice was very distressing. Then I saw these women like surrounding me with light and what they were able to demonstrate for my children, for my girls, the strength of female friendship and how we can survive hard things if we support each other. What a gift. I wouldn't trade it for the world. Like the friendships that I developed during that moment in my life were forged in fire. And these are women who I will never be without.
And just before I ask you the questions I always ask, in the midst of all of this, you've now turned 50. How's that feel? What's coming next?
It's amazing. It feels good. I don't know if it's because of my age. I think it's partly because of my age, and it's partly because of the experiences that I've had. But like, I feel more liberated than I've ever felt before. I feel like fully in control of my own emotions and my own decisions. I have a sticky note on my computer monitor over there that says, you can say no. Just to remind myself. I saw someone recently, Oprah was interviewing someone online about the holiness of no. And I was like, yes, that is a holy word. I think when you're a young mother, it is hard to say no. There are so many expectations placed on us by not only by our kids, but by everyone around us, about how to be in the world, how to move through the world, whether or not you have a career outside of raising your kids, or, whether you choose to breastfeed or not, like all of the, where your kids go to school, all these things that ultimately are no one else's business and really don't matter that much, but feel so important when you're in it. And I think, I'm at an age now where my kids are teenage girls. I'm proud of them. I'm proud of the way they are navigating the world. And I am now like, I'm good. I can do whatever I want. I can say whatever I want. I don't need to do anything for anyone. I have learned that if I feel uncomfortable with something that someone asks me to do, I do not need to feel under any obligation to do it. I can say, no, thanks. I don't want to go have that coffee with that person or whatever it is. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's a pretty run of the mill answer. I think most women my age would say something similar, but it's a gift to be here.
I think so many people listening will agree with that. And that the holiness of no, I think, just completely nails it.
It's amazing. I have to go back and watch the interview again, but it was, it's like I've been quoting it to my kids ever since. Mommy, can you drive me please to like nope, the holiness of no right now. Sorry.
You're on your own, kid.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I am learning to embrace the holiness of no. It's great.
Right. Questions that I always ask. What is your emotional age?
4. No. Wow. That's a really interesting question.
It's so interesting that your very first instinctive reaction was 4. Why?
I think it might be 4, actually, because despite all of the reasons that the world has shown me that I should be very guarded, I remain incredibly open and vulnerable and joyful most of the time. And then also, when people are mean to me, I can throw a tantrum. So, yeah, I do think I'm 4. I'm self-aware and happy and silly, and very, very, very open in ways that I probably should have learned by this age not to be.
Give us a book recommendation. It can be anything at all, like a lifelong important or read it last week. Great.
I'm going to say I just read, I just read a book that's coming out the week after mine. It's called The Doorman by Chris Pavone. And I don't know what I expected of this book, but the cover, like, it wouldn't necessarily have drawn me in. It looks a little bit macho. It is so good. It is such a great book. It's a page turner, also beautifully written. It looks very commercial, like a macho commercial book. And it is in some ways those things, but it's also like an incredibly nuanced and powerful reflection on race and class in the United States. And it's like a beautiful, sad, moving story as well. Like, it has all the things. It has all the different elements that I love in a book, and you just keep turning the pages. So I loved it.
That's really interesting because I haven't read any of his, and I have seen that book and I have seen the cover, and I would not have picked it up.
Yeah, me neither, but I loved, I know Chris a little bit, and I ran into him at an event like a couple months ago. And when we realized our books were coming out a week apart, I said, "Oh, will you send me a galley?" And so he sent it, and I read it, and I was like, thank God I did, because it's great. And I feel like I should talk to his publisher about like bringing the women in, because you're not doing him any favors with those covers. But, I also just read The Names. Can I say 2 books?
Yes.
I don't remember the
Florence
authors.
Knapp.
Yes, that's her debut novel. Astonishing. So good. It's such a unique premise. It's super memorable. Again, beautifully written and incredibly moving. Just, that is the kind of book that will stay with me for a long time. It's very, very memorable, and I hope it does really well. I think it will. I think that's going to be a huge book club book and a lot of word of mouth.
I think it will. It's such a clever premise, isn't it? Because it's basically 3 different sliding doors timelines based on the name that the child is given.
That's right. And some of it really is about the name, but a lot of it is about the courage of the mother in the moment when she names the child, and where her impulse to bestow the different names comes from, and what that leads to in the 3 different timelines. But, great book. What a wonderful writer. I know it's a debut, and I imagine that she has a big career ahead of her.
I think that will make her very happy. What advice would you give younger women?
Get to the holiness of no faster than I did. I think really just to be kinder to ourselves. I think, in this culture, we have almost no choice but to hold ourselves to impossible standards. It's not only unhealthy, but it sets a bad example for our kids when we do that. I find I struggle sometimes being stressed out, and I know that like my kids absorb that from me. So part of my wanting in this phase of my life to be constantly reaching for joy means also to be constantly recharging my battery and doing the things that make me happy, and like putting the stress away whenever I can.
Who is an older woman who's inspired you?
Well, I have to say Miss Oprah. Do you mean from my own life or from...
Oh, anything. Miss Oprah is fine.
I mean, Oprah Winfrey is an angel on earth as far as I'm concerned. Talk about demonstrating how to live your best life. She's so inspiring for so many women. She has absolutely changed the culture of how we read books in the United States. That will be her legacy. And she continues to be someone who strives every day to live meaningfully, to live her life with meaning and intention. It would be so easy for someone like Oprah to just sort of disengage and be like, I'm just gonna sip cocktails on my yacht all day. But she continues pushing the boundaries and finding ways of like improving the lives of the people around her. I mean, you know, I always admired her, even before she picked American Dirt for the book club, before I got to know her personally. And I have only been more and more impressed with her the more I've gotten to know her. And the more I've come to understand that who she appears to be is genuinely who she is.
What's your superpower?
It's funny. I always say this. My vulnerability is my superpower. So I joke about being an emotional 4-year-old who, you know, should learn not to be so vulnerable. But in fact, I think that vulnerability is our greatest strength. And especially as a writer, you know, it makes me feel so powerful that after what I experienced with the last novel, that once I got to the place where I needed to be, I was able to open the vein again and go back to the well and do it. Like whatever happens with this book, for me, the triumph is that I wrote it. And I think were I not able to access my vulnerability in that way and be willing to share it, I wouldn't have been able to write another book.
Last one. How many fucks do you give?
0 fucks. I might give 1 fuck. I don't know. No, it's 0. I think it's 0 right now. Ask me again in like a month. It might be a different answer. But today it's 0.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy The Shift and would like to show your appreciation, why not buy me a coffee? Go to www.buymeacoffee.com/The Shift with Sam Baker. You can hear a new episode of The Shift every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please do rate, review, follow, tell your friends, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to know more about my own experience of shifting, my book, The Shift, How I Lost and Found Myself After 40, and you can too, is out now in paperback.